We all think about life and death. It's one of the biggest questions we face. But what if one of the most common things we tell ourselves about it is just completely wrong? In this explainer, we're going to dig into a really radical perspective from the Apostle Paul that flips the script on death, seeing it not as a part of life, but as its greatest enemy.
Death is just a part of life. I mean, we've all heard this, right? It's supposed to be comforting. It's meant to help us accept what feels inevitable. It kind of paints this picture of a nice, natural, peaceful cycle. But what if it's not the truth?
Well, according to the source material we're looking at today, that's a lie. Not just a little white lie, but a profound deception. And this one powerful, challenging idea is the key that unlocks a totally different way of seeing our own existence.
Okay, so if death isn't a part of life, then what in the world is it? Let's break down this common belief and look at what the source text says instead. And it's a view of death as the absolute enemy of life.
So the main idea here is that life and death aren't, partners in a dance. No, they're enemies locked in a fight to the finish. One is about creation, about building things up. The other is the exact opposite. It's about uncreation. It's not a peaceful transition. It's an all-out war.
The source material uses this really powerful picture to explain this. It says that calling death a part of life is like looking at a pile of wrecked metal and saying you can build a car from it. It makes no sense. Life is that perfectly built, finely tuned machine. Death is the crash that turns it into a heap of scrap metal. It's the total perversion of what it was meant to be.
So if death is the enemy, is that it? Are we just doomed? Well, the text argues, no. There is hope for victory, and it's a victory that literally changes everything.
And this verse, right here, this is really the heart of the whole thing. It recasts the death of Christ as something totally different. Not a tragic defeat, but a brilliant, strategic move against death itself. And it had two very clear goals.
So, you see, it's a two-part victory. First, it was about defeating the actual power behind death. But the second part, and this is the part that hits home for all of us, it's about freeing us from the fear of death. That fear that can keep us in chains, in bondage for our entire lives. Okay, that's some pretty big picture theological stuff. But how does it actually play out in a real person's life? Well, for the Apostle Paul, this wasn't just some abstract idea. It became the new operating system for his whole life, completely rebooting what he cared about and what he lived for. This one line from Paul just nails it. For to me, to live is Christ and to die is gain. I mean, really stop and think about that for a second. If death is no longer something you're afraid of, if it's not a loss but actually a gain, how does that not completely revolutionize the way you live every single day? Suddenly, his whole focus just shifts. It was no longer about, how do I stay alive? The question became, how can I make the biggest possible impact for my cause? Self-preservation just kind of took a back seat to this much, much bigger purpose. And this is what that impact was all about for him. His main goal was to advance his cause, didn't matter if he was living or dying. And this is where his letters become so incredibly important. Think about it. They were basically his technology for extending his impact, a way for his message to reach people he'd never meet and to live on long after he was gone. Okay, so that's Paul. What about us? How does this wild idea apply to you and me right now? Well, the explainer shifts gears here to a challenge for all of us, a call to live a life that's packed with purpose. And here's the kicker. The one thing we all know is true. Life is short. Our time here is limited. So what happens when you take that fact, that our time is short, and you combine it with this total freedom from the fear of what's next? You get this powerful, explosive recipe for a life of real, urgent purpose. So the source lays out this kind of three-step game plan for what a life of impact looks like. It starts with putting a cause that's bigger than you at the absolute center of your life. Then you share the message of hope that you found. And finally, you build a strong, unified community around that shared belief.
And that last point, the one about unity, that wasn't just some throwaway line. According to the source, it was one of the main reasons Paul wrote one of his most famous letters. He knew, deep down, that a group of people, all on the same page, all working together, they could accomplish so much more than any one person ever could on their own. So, at the end of the day, we're left with this completely radical idea. Death isn't a natural end. It's a defeated enemy. And if the fear of it is gone, the real question isn't if you'll die, but how you'll live. The text leaves us with one final, very personal challenge. If life is short and death has been defeated,
What impact are you going to make?